This is Michael Forsyth on WQAT, the radio station of Allen Temple A.M.E., the downtown church in Greenville, South Carolina. We're here today with Joe Cunningham, former U.S. Congressman who's now running for governor. Mr. Cunningham represented the 1st Congressional District. I should mention that I'm affiliated with a firm that's doing some campaign work for Mr. Cunningham, but I will endeavor to ask the same questions as I would any other candidate. So, first, Mr. Cunningham, let me ask you, why did you decide to run for governor?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because, if you, as you're saying, if you figure out the why, you can make it through anyhow. And that's usually the first question you get is, why are you stepping into this? And, the short answer is, I believe, my dad taught me, you go where the need is. And, when I ran for Congress back in 2017, 2018, is when President Trump was in the White House, Republicans controlled the House and the Senate, and I saw that our democracy was at stake. And that's why I ran, because that's where I felt the need was. After this recent election, even though we, ran ahead of Joe Biden by 5 points in our district, we still lost because it's lost by 1 point, just 1 point, in a gerrymandered district, very gerrymandered district. I thought about running for my seat again. At the same time, I couldn't just ignore the chaos that's coming out of Columbia, because in the middle of a pandemic, what's this current governor focused on? Well, the first bill he signed into law was the most restrictive, abortion bill in the entire country. Then it was a bill that allowed people to carry guns on their hips, no training. During a time when our state's murder rate has never been higher. After that, it was bringing back firing squads. Even a bill to allow Donald Trump to be buried on the State House grounds. Listen to all that. It was obvious that the need was right here in our own backyard. And so I'm running to bring South Carolina into the future because right now, our governor is stuck in the past. This is a governor who's been in office longer than I've been alive. And where does South Carolina find itself? At the bottom of every list that we want to be at the top of. We're last in education, we're last in infrastructure, we're last in vaccine distribution. I'm running to bring us up to first in those lists. I think 40 years is long enough. If you can't get it done in 40 years, it's time to move on. Yeah.
Well, maybe we can back up a little bit and let the listeners get to know you as a person. Tell us a little bit about your parents, your family background.
Yeah, so I grew up the youngest of 5 boys, and my mother owned a small business that she started from our own kitchen table, and my father was a public defender, and later a prosecutor and a judge, and right now, I live in West Ashley. I went to college at Charleston. Later on, I got my engineering degree. Then I got my law degree. And I was practicing law, when I decided to run for Congress back in 2018. And again, I was driven off the sidelines because of what I saw was happening to our country. Never been in politics before. When I launched our campaign in 2017, we were given no chance. Nobody picked up the phones. Nobody came to our events. We had no name ID, no money, but we kept working. And I thought that what we were putting out there was that there was an appetite for, and that was, just strong, a bipartisan effort to make a difference. And while in Congress, I was proud to be ranked one of the most bipartisan and effective members of Congress. I had 2 of my bills, make it through a divided Congress and get signed into law by President Trump. As a freshman lawmaker, that's pretty much unheard of. And so very proud of the accomplishments that I had while in D.C. and now I want to put that to work statewide. And, I live in West Ashley. I have a 3-year-old son named Boone who is just the gas in my tank. He just brings me alive. And he's learning to swim right now, so that's been fun this summer. But I'm trying to raise him with the same values that my parents raised me. Honesty, kindness, compassion, empathy, and I think all those are reflected in the things that I talk about and the issues that I talk about when on the campaign trail. And honestly, I think there are things that people gravitate to. Folks believe deep down in their heart, and they want government to be a reflection of those values and our people. And right now, it's not. It's just not. Again, this is what happens when you have a governor who's been in politics for longer than I've been alive. Folks forget why they got into it in the first place, and that's not something I'm going to do.
Well, you had mentioned that you were one of 5 brothers, and the youngest one of that. And I wonder what being in that situation with a lot of rough and tumble, being knocked down, getting back up, kind of having to negotiate with these guys without necessarily having animosity when you're knocked down. How did that, you think, affect you in terms of that thing of thinking about bipartisanship?
I think it's I think it all comes back to my upbringing. Being the youngest of 5 brothers, there's no shortage of fights in the house. The doors were hanging off the hinges. The bedroom doors, none of the doors locked in my house, not even the front door. And you learn to take a punch, but you also learn to throw a punch too. Mm-hmm. And grew up in a home where my dad was a lay preacher at Methodist Church, and those Christian values that are the values that I try to live by, those kindness and compassion and empathy, and those are, I think those help shape me into who I am today, and I think that spills over into bipartisanship, listening to people, give folks a chance, recognizing that, as my dad said, God gave us twice as many ears as he did mouths, and that's because he wanted us to listen twice as much as we talk. That comes back to this 46 county tour when we launched our campaign, where we promised to go to every single part of this state, no matter how red or how rural or how forgotten they may have been by this current governor, because our South Carolina comeback is going to include everybody.
Yeah. Well, we're focusing really today on issues that impact the black community in particular. And I'd like to, and a lot of these were really come from the Black Caucus of the Democratic Party of Greenville County. They identified certain issues, and those are the ones I'd really like to stress. Well, one of them is voter suppression. We all know that pretty much as soon as the election in November was over, the Republicans started falling over themselves, coming up with different ways to put it bluntly, keep black people from voting, to shut down the black get-out-the-vote machine, as it were. So my question for you is, what steps would you take as governor to stop voter suppression?
Yeah, I think we need like you said, we have to call out these un-American attacks on our voting rights and see them for actually what they are. They are trying to keep communities of color from voting and trying to push people out of the voting booth. And I believe that our democracy is best represented when people are able to cast their vote. And this is something I focus on in Congress. I marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with John Lewis, got to serve with civil rights icons like him that have fought for these rights, fought for these freedoms. And I was honored to continue doing that in Congress, supporting John Lewis's Voting Rights Act. But South Carolina should be leading on this issue. And, you look at our state, and there's so much that can be done, beyond just, access to the ballot box. We got to put an end to straight ticket voting, which simply encourages partisanship. The first question people have to answer is Democrat or Republican. It puts people in two different camps. We've got to end gerrymandering once and for all. We have, districts that are, I represented a gerrymandered district that had 5 parts of 5 different counties, and it was drawn along racial boundaries, and that's wrong. And that doesn't reflect accurate representation. And I think we need to expand voting rights. As governor, I would lead the charge to end what's known as Confederate Memorial Day and replace it by making Election Day a state holiday in South Carolina. These are ways in which we can move forward. in this issue and lead on voting rights, as opposed to falling behind and falling to the bottom of the list like we have in education, in healthcare, in infrastructure, and everything else.
Yeah. Are you concerned that this? First of all, I didn't even know there was a Confederate Memorial Day. So, are you concerned that in some quarters that people might consider this like an attack on their heritage or whatever, and it becomes like a big negative argument?
Which part?
Ending Confederate Memorial Day.
No, I mean, look, people, again, there's so many restrictions in place that people that prohibit people from voting or make it hard for people to vote. The fact that you have to check one of these boxes for in-person absentee or early voting. We should have, just like we did during this last election cycle, we should have no excuse early voting, where people can come out and vote early if they want to. And I don't know why people are so scared of that. Why? You have to ask yourself, why are certain people trying to restrict other people's access to the voting booth? If you want to win elections and win campaigns, win on the issues, win on your values. Don't do it by trying to limit other people's ability to cast their vote, because that's un-American.
Well, I think some listeners, they may have heard the term gerrymandering, but they don't necessarily understand what it is. Can you explain a little bit more and why it's bad?
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue that may not be the sexiest issue. It may not be the issue that people share on Twitter and Facebook, but it is really, I see, the greatest impact to our democracy. Because right now, gerrymandering is essentially where politicians draw lines to pick voters instead of allowing voters to pick their politicians. And I saw the disastrous effect of it up in D.C. When these folks you see on either CNN, Fox, MSNBC, the loudest members of Congress, most often come from a gerrymandered district where they don't have to worry about crossing the aisle and finding common ground. And most of them are districts that have been hand-drawn for Republicans. So where reaching across the aisle to Democrats is seen as a threat to their existence. It's seen as a liability. Yeah. Because that will create a primary challenge for them, and all they have to do is win their primary, and then they coast to the general election. And so you have a good portion of people who feel like their vote doesn't matter. And in actuality, because of the way some lines have been drawn in some districts, they're probably right. And by getting rid of gerrymandering and going to independent redistricting commissions, nonpartisan people who draw lines, that creates a more equitable system. And many other states have already done this. And that's why I support H.R. 1 in Congress, which was one of the largest anti-corruption bills ever in American history. And it sets up independent redistricting commissions. So, I think you need to be asking some of these politicians, why do you support gerrymandering? Why can't you just run on issues and win on issues? Why do you have to tweak the lines and redraw districts? And with computer models right now, it is very, very easy to do this through algorithms, ways in which they can do it to maximize their power. And again, I think this is totally un-American.
Yeah. Criminal justice reform is also an issue that is near and dear to the hearts of a lot of African Americans. I know our state probably also, I think, is ranked pretty low in terms of criminal justice. What steps would you take as governor to address criminal justice reform?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to fight for the same things I fought for in Congress, and what we see is disproportionate impact to communities of color with violence. And I was proud to sponsor the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which banned chokeholds, which banned no-knock warrants. These are practices that disproportionately impact African Americans. And I want to take a step back and talk about also just the murder rate in our state and crime, which has never been higher in South Carolina. And you look at how this gun violence is being perpetuated, and we've released a gun violence prevention plan that invests in communities programs and invest in local hospitals to target people who may be susceptible to gun violence, whether it be battered spouses that come into hospitals who may be eventual victims of gun violence. One of the bills I co-sponsored and supported was the bill to close the Charleston loophole, which is how Dylan Roof obtained his weapon. And as everyone knows, when he walked into Mother Emanuel Church in downtown Charleston and killed 9 black parishioners while their heads were bowed in prayer. This gun violence is something we have to address, and it not just doesn't start and end with gun violence prevention. You take a step back, and a lot of teens and young people are turning to guns because they don't have equal opportunity as it relates to jobs and businesses and things like that. And we need to provide equity across the board. That includes access to capital in starting businesses and a level playing field. And right now, people don't have it. So oftentimes they'll turn to the quick and easy buck or to crime because they feel like they're fighting an uphill battle in other ways. And so there's work to be done all across the board on this. But we're going to continue doing the things that I've been doing in Congress and leading by example on this.
Yeah. Well, recently you announced that you supported and would push for the legalization of marijuana, which I think polls have shown that quite a bit of Americans are for. It's almost a mystery why something that popular hasn't been passed nationally. But what are your thoughts about that? Why did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, look, I mean, this goes back to why I'm running for governor. I'm running for governor to bring our state into the future. And Governor McMaster is holding us back in the past. There's a clear contrast between that. This is, I'm running against somebody who's been in politics longer than I've been alive. And, our governor's stuck in the past, and our marijuana laws are stuck in the past too. And we talk about the disproportionate impact our marijuana laws have on communities of color, where, on average, a black man or woman is nearly 4 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana than someone who's white. And in other counties, in the upstate, it's sometimes up to 8 times as likely, even though they use it at the exact same rate. And this is discriminatory. It needs to end, and our plan to legalize marijuana will do just that. But we're talking about other ways to help as well, because I want the expungement of records for these low-level drug offenders, marijuana-related offenders, because so many people, got arrested for a bag of weed that would have been legal in other states, but in South Carolina, it stops them from getting a job. It stops them from getting a loan. It stops them from going to school. Stops them from getting a car. So by expunging those records, it gives people a second chance at life, and particularly communities of color that have been more impacted by this failed war on marijuana than other communities.
Yeah. Well, would you consider going even beyond that? Because there are now situations where marijuana production in this country has become big business, is making some people, primarily some white rich guys who are already rich, become even bigger millionaires. And you have some people serving very long terms in prison who are often people of color. Would you consider, as governor, doing something to commute some of those sentences?
I mean, if people are serving time for offenses that would now be legal,
illegal, but were illegal at the time.
I think that they deserve a second chance at life as well. And I think there's laws set up for how these laws, and other states have provide blueprints how these laws could apply retroactively. And if you're expunging someone's record, for those offenses, I think it's for those people who have served their time and not. Yeah.
And I wonder what would be the economic effect, say, if instead where some tobacco fields are growing here in little patches, of having marijuana grown in this state.
I mean, you look at the upstate and agriculture opportunities, and we want to prioritize South Carolina farmers. We want this to be a economic boom to South Carolina farmers, particularly those small to mid-sized farms, family-owned farms. The number of African-American farmers in our state is dwindling rapidly. And I met with 2 brothers And at a farmer's market in Columbia a couple months back, and they're saying like, our kids don't want to do it, and I get it. It's tough. It's tough work. I've baled hay and I've housed tobacco. I know it's tough work. It's a good, honest living as well, and it can be a good paycheck. So incentivizing people to stay in that business is going to be helpful for all South Carolinians. And you just look at the number, and that's the jobs, that's the businesses that can be produced through it. Let's take a look at the revenue. Let's talk about the revenue a bit. And you have a state like Oregon, who's smaller. It's smaller than South Carolina. And just last year, they had over $130 million in tax revenue from marijuana. Think about what South Carolina could do with that kind of money every year in, year out, and probably growing, and honestly probably more, because none of the states around here have gone there. You got bridges that are falling apart that people drive over. We have teachers that are leaving our state because we pay them like crap. McMaster just tried to force teachers back into the classroom last year without being vaccinated, and so they're having to drive up to North Carolina to get vaccinated. My brother's a special ed teacher in a public school, and when he leaves school, he goes and works at a grocery store, and on the weekends he's bartending. And his story is not uncommon, because I know many other teachers who work second jobs, third jobs. They coach, they tutor, and at the end of the day, they still have to come out of pocket for school supplies. And this could provide an opportunity to get paid them more money, retain our teachers. And we talk about teachers a lot, and that's what we talk about. But it's about our kids. It's about giving them the most and best resources for a chance at success. Because that's what we're doing this for. I've got a 3-year-old. I got skin in the game, and I want the best for him and his generation, the generations that follow. It's just a strong contrast to where our current governor is, because he's providing no ideas, no solutions. His 40 years in politics, and we're still at the bottom in education. One season of losing gets you fired from being a football coach, and we're allowing him 40 seasons of a losing record. It's time he'd be fired.
Well, as you mentioned, so I think we're 44 in education, and unfortunately, the African
which is no prize place, even by those standards.
Yeah, we're not at the bottom, but anytime you're below Mississippi and Alabama, not to diss those states,
and these, go back to marijuana. These are states that are ahead of us on that,
right?
On that issue, because they see the opportunity. They say.
But certainly, African Americans children are really hit the hardest with these issues. There's such a disparity. It was mentioned to me that many of them are 2 or 3 years behind grade level. Yeah. What are some things you might do to address that disparity?
This is a overall theme of with COVID and COVID's impact on South Carolina, because we had our share of challenges before COVID. Our education system was in shambles. Our healthcare system was in shambles, and COVID simply exacerbated this. We had issues with rural Wi-Fi, people not being able to connect to the internet. All these issues were just made surface. In some communities, they may have turned a blind eye, to it, but they were there. And I think what COVID did is it brought this to the surface and put it in front of everyone. And when we come out of this fully, and the question is, do you want a governor who's going to be taking us into the future, or somebody who wants to hold us back in the past? Because I'll tell you where the past is. The past is Governor McMaster. The past is last in education. The past is last in infrastructure. I want us to be leading in those areas, and education is just one of them. And COVID has compounded what was already a bad problem into a disastrous problem. And if we don't incentivize our teachers with pay, they're gone. 1 out of 7 teachers last year alone, 1 out of 7 left. They said, "I'm going to sell real estate. I'm going to work in a restaurant. I'm going to do something where I feel appreciated, where I'm paid for my work." That's why they're leaving. That's exactly why they're leaving. And so, when I drop off, my son at school, or any parent does, and parent that's listening right now, they're dropping off their most prized possession. You're leaving it in the hands of somebody, and you want them to feel valued for their work, and you want to treat them with respect. And our current governor does none of that.
Yeah. So you want to raise the salaries of teachers, as I understand it, to the national level. And do you also, what about incentivizing teachers to go to some of these schools that are underperforming and are just in bad shape? They call it the corridor of shame in some of these other places.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we can do to lift all boats with a rising tide, and by paying our teachers more, and by incentivizing them and providing student loan relief for teachers that may qualify. This is about incentivizing teachers to do this job because they're leaving the profession, and this is about investing in our education system. And the current governor doesn't want to do that. He doesn't see it as a priority, or he may say we don't have the money. And I want to remind people that when a politician tells you like, oh, we just don't have the money for that, what they're telling you is it's not a priority. And this is a priority for me because education and healthcare are the foundation of a good economy. They're the foundation of a good society. If people aren't educated and healthy, they're not going to be good working, contributing members of society. And our governor has turned his back on education and healthcare, and I guess it's thrown up his hands. Said we're last in these, so we're not going to change. So he's focusing on culture issues and things like that. But this is going to be a serious. This state needs an education governor, and that's exactly what I'm going to be.
Yeah, I think I remember some mention about this. I think just one historically black college that is publicly funded.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts about doing something with that?
It's just time to invest in education for everybody, and that includes fairly funding our state's only publicly funded HBCU. And it's about making good on a promise that was made a long time ago, which is in South Carolina, if you put in the work and you maintain a B average or better, you can go to college for free. And that's not the case. A lot of people may not remember that when we passed the state lottery, that's what it was intended for. But career politicians in Columbia have just robbed us of that. And this governor has cheered them on every single step of the way. And again, there's a lot to be fixed in our education system, and we have a long ways to go. I'm looking forward to taking us into the future.
One of the things that you came forward with, which I hadn't really heard about previously, we've done a lot in this state of bringing in companies from overseas. In the Greenville area, we had Michelin, we have I guess BMW. That was a special program, and I think it's been successful to some degree. But you have some skepticism about how much this is really those sorts of tax incentives, whatever we do to bring them, how much that's really done for the people of the state. Can you elaborate?
This goes back to taking care of our own South Carolinians. Our governor has dangled out tax incentives for businesses to come and create jobs here, which I'm not opposed to as long as they're good paying jobs. We don't want the low wage jobs that take advantage of our workforce. We don't want that. What we want is the good paying jobs. And what's happening, and newspapers and people have reported on this, is that the governor has offered these tax incentives to businesses that promise hundreds of jobs, and then they only create a fraction of those jobs. And what happens? They still reap the windfall of having those tax incentives, but they're not held accountable for not fulfilling their end of the bargain, not bringing the number of jobs that they promised. And I think they need to be held accountable. And I think if we're giving those tax incentives to out-of-state companies, why don't we offer those to minority-owned businesses here in South Carolina who want to grow their businesses right here within our state? Why are we doing that? And these are things that we want to lead on, that we want to continue talking about. And because, like I said, it's an issue of fairness and equity. And right now, this governor would rather offer the tax incentives, get the photo op, cut the ribbon, and not worry about whether or not the company honored their end of the deal. and not worry about whether or not the company just ends up polluting our rivers and our land and our oceans, and then taking advantage of our workforce. That's not going to happen when I'm governor.
Another issue where there's clearly disparity is in healthcare, and I've read, which is just astonishing, that even among black patients black patients have the same level of insurance as white patients. There's often a disparity, as well as there are differences in how the employees of different institutions are treated. How would you address that issue?
There's a lot. We talked about economic disparities. Talked about law disparities as relates to law enforcement. Talk about education disparities. Healthcare is right up there with them. And you look at the rate at which African American women die in childbirth compared to white women. It's truly embarrassing, and we're so much better than that. And this is about making sure that people in rural communities, which are oftentimes communities of color, have proper access to health care. Making sure that their health centers and their hospitals don't close. And that's exactly what they've done under this guy. Making sure that they have access to Wi-Fi, so you can have telehealth. There's a good telestroke program being operated down by MUSC. And this cuts down on cost of healthcare, but also broadens the reach of healthcare services. And right now, this is just another part of society where there's disparity, and depending on if you're white or black, there's a clear difference in the type of healthcare and access to it you get.
Yeah, and how does Medicaid expansion? Okay. All right, sure.
Yes, well, no, I'm glad you can kind of touch on that, but my first act as governor would be to expand Medicaid so that 200,000 South Carolinians have access to health care. And expanding Medicaid, this is another issue where Governor McMaster is stuck in the past. Dozens of other states have already done it, because what they realize, it's good for the economy. It injects millions of dollars into our economy automatically. It could create like 40,000 new jobs. It could save our rural hospitals. And for those people who aren't on Medicaid, who have private insurance, studies have shown in other states where they've expanded Medicaid, their insurance rates drop as well. So this isn't just about people who may have access to Medicaid or who would be affected by expansion of it. This is about anyone who has health insurance or not. And this is, when the federal government is offering to pick up 95% of the tab, and we just have to pitch in 5% by expansion, this governor's turned down the what I would think is one of the greatest economic opportunities that exist.
One of the criticisms of Jamie Harrison's campaign when he was running, and I thought he was going to win, I thought he was such a great candidate, was that he didn't really reach out enough and work enough with the black churches around the state, which are such a center of political strength. How would your campaign? What kind of approach is your campaign taking?
Yeah, I mean, we're very much boots on the ground. And look, Jamie's a friend of mine. I can't critique his campaign, what he was doing. I was focused on my campaign and what I was doing. I will say we probably both suffered under this environment of COVID. Not being able to get on the ground, touch people, meet people, listen to them directly, and that's changed this time. And here I am. I'm up in the upstate in Anderson County. We're on a 46 county tour. I think we've sent a strong message. So we're coming to every single county. We're going to talk to as many people as we can. And we've already, our campaign, we hit the ground running. We got people on the ground in the upstate. We've got people on the ground in the Midlands. We've got people on the ground in the Low Country. This campaign is going to be unlike anything South Carolina has ever seen before. We're going to have some fun. We're going to be blunt. We're going to be honest. And we're going to go to every part of the state. And I think that's the reason we've had the success we had in early fundraising, because folks realize that, number one, we've won tough races before, and we can do it again. And I think that gets people excited.
Well, this has just been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr.
Appreciate
Cunningham.
it, Michael. Great to be here.
This has been Michael Forsyth on WQAT, having a conversation with Joe Cunningham, who is running for South Carolina Governor. You've been listening to WQAT, the radio station of Allen Temple A.M.E., the downtown church in Greenville, South Carolina.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.